2025 NBA free agency has already had plenty of big surprises for us and a ton of big moves as well, so let's go ahead and talk about all of them. Of course, the biggest story of NBA free agency so far is Damian Lillard is no longer a Milwaukee Buck and Miles Turner now is. I did a full breakdown video on this, but I couldn't do the free agency video and not mention this. This is, to me, an absolutely crazy move by the Milwaukee Bucks to basically pay Miles Turner $50 million for the next couple of seasons. If you account for what they're going to be paying Damian Lillard on their salary cap because they waived him and stretched his contract, I should say. And then you add that to what Miles Turner is going to be making. They're basically paying $50 million for Miles Turner to add to a team with Kyle Kuzma around Giannis and Bobby Portis also in the front court. I don't understand it. I understand that it's difficult to say, okay, we're going to trade Giannis now, but from a team building standpoint, that's just the correct move. And then they just continue to make it worse. And people are acting like this $20 million sitting on their payroll and on their salary cap for the next couple of seasons just isn't going to matter. It's absolutely going to matter. Like I said, I went into this in more depth and more detail in a different video, but I really don't like the move for Milwaukee. One of the other moves as well that isn't necessarily a part of free agency, but I still feel needs to be mentioned because it happened in this time period, is the Cam Johnson, Michael Porter Jr. first round pick swap thing that happened between Denver and Brooklyn. Again, did an entire video on this if you guys want to check that out more in depth, but I love the move for both teams. I really understand what Denver is doing by adding Cam Johnson. He's just better for what they do. He's also cheaper than Michael Porter Jr. and the Nets get that future first round pick. Maybe they can flip Michael Porter Jr. at some point in the future, but even if Michael Porter Jr. plays 0 games for the Nets, I still think it is an absolute win of a trade for them. But again, those two moves you can check out entire videos on. Now let's get to some of the other stuff that happened, beginning with the Jaren Jackson Jr. extension. This is a massive contract, one that I think caught a lot of people by surprise, and there's a lot of things happening in Memphis this offseason. Of course, we had the Desmond Bane trade, and I think part of the reason for that trade was this impending Jaren Jackson extension. I think the bigger part of it is the fact that they got a really great trade offer from Orlando, but trading away Bane, getting that salary off their books, allows them to renegotiate and extend Jaren Jackson Jr. to a massive new contract. And at first, a lot of people reacted to this saying, wow, that's a lot of money for Jaren Jackson, but he could have just left in free agency in 2026. There's a lot of teams that are going to have cap space. There's a lot of teams around the league that are really gearing up for a big summer in 2026. And Memphis didn't really have the ability to just regular extend him because he was making such a little amount for this year. Because of the cap rules, basically trading away Bane, opening up some flexibility, renegotiating and extending his contract is a massive deal for Memphis and kind of puts to rest all the rumors about, oh, they traded Desmond Bane, or they trading Jaren Jackson, or they trading Ja Morant, because they also added guys like Ty Jerome and brought back Santi Aldama, both on pretty good value deals. I can understand why people are freaking out about the overall number for Jaren Jackson, but Jaren Jackson's really good. I've liked him even going all the way back to the draft. I don't mind it. And even if you do think it's a little bit of an overpay, I think that's made up for by the fact that these are really nice value deals for Memphis. Aldama could be the third, maybe the fourth best player on the team next year, and he's making $17 million a year, which in this current climate with the salary cap continuing to rise really is not that bad of a deal for him at all. And Ty Jerome is kind of perfect for what they need. Ever since Tyus Jones left, they've needed this other creator, this other kind of setup guy behind Ja Morant. And Ty Jerome isn't like an outstanding passer or anything, but he's a creator. He can shoot. And with all the losses they've had on the perimeter this offseason, bringing in someone like Ty Jerome is really helpful. I like what Memphis did in free agency. One of the other big moves coming up that I think was pretty surprising is Dorian Finney-Smith going to Houston. Houston making a couple of moves this offseason, including extending Steven Adams, bringing in Clint Capella, but Finney-Smith is definitely the biggest one on the board because I think most people expected the Lakers to be able to just retain him either with him opting into his player option or signing him to a new deal. But Houston comes out of nowhere. They use some of their mid-level exception and they bring in Finney-Smith on a 4-year deal worth kind of what he was going to make before, maybe a little bit less, but that long-term security and the overall money is enough to get him to Houston. And Houston continues to put together a really interesting deep roster around the newly added Kevin Durant. And if we were giving out offseason grades, which I will certainly at some point later on, the Rockets are getting an A+ right now because they are adding depth. They didn't give up that much for Kevin Durant, and they are just so well built, and honestly built in a way that reminds me of a team like Oklahoma City that we saw dominate on defense all year long, whose depth and versatility really helped them throughout a postseason run. It's not exactly the same level, but by re-signing Jabari Smith, continuing to add in the front court with Finney-Smith, Steven Adams, and Clint Capella, and with Alperen Sengun still there, they have so many different lineup possibilities, and I love all those moves in Houston. Obviously, I wasn't the only one thinking this, but I certainly was wondering when they were adding Capella and they were bringing back Steven Adams, I was wondering, does this mean that Sengun is potentially on the move elsewhere? Because you think about all the front court guys they have, Finney-Smith, Kevin Durant, Şengün, Steven Adams, Clint Capella, Jabari Smith. That's a lot of guys in the front court. Obviously, they think that they can play big. They can play KD at the 3 a bunch, even though he hasn't done that as much lately in his career. But it does make me at least wonder. Right now, it seems like they're standing pat, but I like all those moves for Houston. And a continued theme here throughout free agency has been big extensions, and that certainly was the case in Minnesota, where they extended Naz Reid and Julius Randle to big new contracts, and they lose Nickeil Alexander-Walker in free agency, or I should say in a sign and trade, but really in free agency, so they could afford both Reid and Randle. He ends up going to Atlanta. Let's first talk about what's happening in Minnesota. We talked about this in an offseason video for them previously. It was going to be basically impossible for them to retain Reid, Randle, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, all while staying underneath the second apron, and they are desperate to stay underneath the second apron because that just limits so much of your flexibility. And so ultimately, they choose Nickeil Alexander-Walker as the guy that leaves. They have some other role guys ready to step up behind him, and they keep Reid and Randle to add, of course, to the front court of Rudy Gobert. They tried to make a run at Kevin Durant this offseason, but ultimately decided that the flexibility of having Reid and Randle from a lineup perspective, as well as having those two salaries broken up rather than the previous gigantic Karl Anthony Towns salary they traded away a year ago, having those two things separately rather than Towns together gives them the flexibility that they want over the next couple of years of the Anthony Edwards era, and both of those contracts are really not all that difficult to move. I saw a little bit of pushback on how big the Naz Reid deal was, but frankly, that's just kind of the going rate for players of his caliber. I know it seems crazy to see a number of $25 million for a $6 but as the cap continues to go up, and as guys like SGA and Devin Booker are signing contracts worth over $70 million a year, the max contract in the NBA is not $39 or $40 million anymore, so you kind of have to continue to scale up. Like 25 compared to 70 is kind of like 12 compared to when the cap or the max contract was 35 or 40. Like that's just where we are now, and I really like both those deals for Minnesota as just a let's keep this going, let's run this back, but still maintaining that flexibility to make some other moves. And in a little bit of a weird offseason where they had a lot of things to juggle, I like the moves for them. Now, it seems like there's been a lot of positive things happening here, so let's go a little bit more in the negative direction. There's two teams that I'm a little bit confused about what is happening here with their free agency decisions. The first is the Toronto Raptors. They re-signed Jakob Poeltl to another massive extension, and they just continue to do this for basically their entire roster. Everybody on their team that is at least somewhat meaningful to their long-term future, they're just handing out a bunch of money to, and they have this giantly expensive team, this giantly expensive starting five that wins 34, 35 games in the East. Like, yes, they have injuries and maybe they weren't always trying to win, and maybe this year they will try to win, and all of a sudden they're going to be some 45 win team. And they are all good players, like Brandon Ingram, Scotty Barnes, Jakob Poeltl, RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley. These are all good players individually. I'm not sure they fit super well together. I'm not sure they're really taking you anywhere in the Eastern Conference, and they're all pretty expensive. And now that gets added onto with the Jakob Poeltl situation. Obviously, they love him. They had him when they drafted him, then they traded for him, then they've given him 2 new extensions now. It, to me, is just kind of a lot for someone that's like the 15th best center in the league. Like, it just seems like a lot of money for a guy that maybe they could have gotten some value out of in a trade. I'm just unsure about the overall direction in Toronto, and I think they are too, because now they're under new management in the front office with Masai Ujiri now gone. Another move I didn't really love is Dennis Schroeder ending up in Sacramento. They signed him to 3 years, $45 million, and it's just ironic that they're in desperate need of a point guard this offseason because they had Tyrese Halliburton and De'Aaron Fox on the roster, and they traded away both. They are trying, I guess, to make some moves in terms of getting rid of someone like Malik Monk to make the money work for Dennis Schroeder. They were able to make it work anyway because they swapped Valanciunas and Saric with the Denver Nuggets, but ultimately, I just don't think Dennis Schroeder is worth this much money. Like, he's fine, he's good, he was solid for Detroit. I really thought Detroit was going to try and retain him, but obviously they felt their money was better spent elsewhere. At this point in Dennis Schroeder's career, I think he's just best served as a bench guy and just isn't really going to help you win all that many games, and I just don't really love that number for Sacramento, and it feels like oh my gosh, we have to have a point guard all of a sudden on our team because we've got LaVine and DeRozan and Malik Monk and Sabonis, and we need someone else, and it just doesn't seem like it's going to be a great fit. I don't love him for that amount of money. But let's go back to some moves that I did like. Nickeil Alexander-Walker to Atlanta. There's really an entire Atlanta offseason video that has to happen at some point because, again, if we're giving out offseason grades, they're getting an A+. I really, really like his fit in Atlanta. I thought he was going to be one of the main free agents of the offseason. He gets a little bit more even than that mid-level exception that most teams had access to, and that number for Atlanta I think is going to be really helpful for them possibly in future trade stuff, or if they do want to make some kind of massive move for someone like Giannis, they're they're okay trading away, Zachary Richeche, whoever else, because then they have that other guy in Alexander Walker that can step up. I love what Atlanta did in the draft in terms of moving around, getting that future Pelicans pick. They continue to add some really nice pieces, and Alexander Walker is just another example of that. Then you get to some of these smaller kind of veteran moves. D'Angelo Russell going to Dallas has not really been discussed. I'm not a D'Angelo Russell guy, but I think for Dallas's purposes, he's literally perfect. Like, they need a guard. They need someone that can score until they get Kyrie Irving back at whatever point that is. And then when that happens, they need someone that can just kind of slide to the bench and play 18 minutes a game. And D'Angelo Russell fits perfectly within that role, because if I'm the Mavs, I don't really want to have a lot of like Spencer Dinwiddie involvement in the beginning part of my season. And that's what they were looking at before adding D'Angelo Russell. It's a super fair price. And I really like the upside of that move for Dallas, because when Kyrie comes back, if he's really good, they have all this depth. D'Lo doesn't really have to play all that much for them, but in the beginning part of the year, he's probably going to play like 30 minutes a game just out of necessity. I like that move for them. I also like Brook Lopez with the Clippers. The Clippers just kind of under the radar, trying to make their little moves. They re-signed James Harden to a big new deal. And I just like the versatility and the uniqueness of Brook Lopez within this Clippers roster. They have a bunch of guys that can really defend, that are good athletes, that maybe are questionable shooters. And Lopez is a guy that's he's going to come out there and shoot 5 threes a game. Like, he's a total opposite of what Zubac does. And he can really help them in the paint when Zubac potentially gets into foul trouble, which he's prone to do against some of these more difficult center matchups in the Western Conference. I really like that move for the Clippers. Then you get to some of the weirdness in Detroit. Obviously, we don't know what's happening with Malik Beasley. We don't know if he's going to be in the league at all next year, and that contract was just basically taken away by Detroit. That was a reported offer. They were going to bring him back, and they basically used that, but a little bit less, to get Duncan Robinson. It really helps their shooting. We learned last year with Detroit that the number one thing they're going to need around Cade Cunningham is spacing and shooting, and Duncan Robinson certainly provides that. So that's where we're at with a pretty crazy and wild 2025 free agency period so far.